Here we are with the second part of the Fed and the future deflation. So, remember, normally I don't talk about this stuff because it's not going to happen anytime soon, but it looks like we are just about to arrive. So I need to talk about this. Okay, in between the first video and this one, if I haven't already done so, you should remind me, and maybe this reminds myself. I need to show you the all-time highs in stocks and those type of figures, and also show you the stock market going up into these ridiculous highs into the stratosphere because it is a huge bubble. Okay? So, yeah, we need to have talked about bubbles before we get into this too much, because this is really the end game. So what's going to happen is we need to understand deflation first. Deflation is actually a good thing. You think about computers, and the price has been deflating for a number of years. My parents bought our first computer for like $800. It was an Apple IIe. It had 64K of memory. You know, you could play the Oregon Trail and, push a little button and a little buckshot would go over and hit a deer. But, a game called Pong where a cursor would bounce back and forth. And we could type documents on a word processor, and we had a big floppy disk like this that would spin in the drive and record things, okay? That was for $800. These days, I think I can get a PlayStation or an Xbox with a terabyte, like a million bits of memory, as opposed to the 64K that I had. And I think I can get it for like $300. So what I've seen is computers have definitely gotten cheaper, and I've also seen an increase in value, and so that is deflation. And normally we think of that as a good thing. We think of that as progress in our society. All right? The problem is deflation is the opposite of inflation. And if you remember, when I told you what inflation does, is it makes it easier to pay debts. So it causes everyone to go into debt, because they go into debt, they buy real goods, and they watch the prices go up, and they're wealthier because of that. That's the thing about inflation. So you use debt to then grab assets and pay it back with worthless dollars. If you have deflation, though, in the whole economy, it does the opposite. So what we think of as a good thing in a normal economy with people that work and save, now, instead, deflation becomes a horrible thing in an economy where everyone is consumption-oriented and into debt. And as you notice, we have a lot of debt. So consumer debt is $20 trillion. Student loan debt is $1.7 trillion. Our national government is in debt $27 trillion. Our state governments are in debt another $50 trillion. So what's going to happen when all that inflation type of economy reverts to a deflationary economy? For all the people who are workers and savers, it's going to be awesome. It's going to make everything cheaper and increase their value. But what is it going to do to all the debtors? They're absolutely ruined. Okay? And so if that's the case, cash actually becomes more valuable in a deflation. And debts are harder to pay off. Remember, these things were reversed for inflation. Now for deflation, they go the other way. So if we face deflation, it will be the most devastating thing to debtors, because they will have to work harder. And you think about those state and national debts. People will have to work harder because they're going to have to pay higher taxes just to stay in the same place. I don't know that Americans are up to the task. And on top of that, their own debts, which are tremendous, will also be harder to pay. So they will have harder debts in their own lives, and on top of that, they will have harder debts because of the government for taxation. And that's just a recipe for civil unrest. Okay? So when that happens, people break out the torches and the pitchforks, and they have a revolution, and they completely change things. Because that's what happens when you have a deflationary event thrown into a society that's consumption and debt oriented. Now you remember our GDP equation, C plus I plus G plus X minus M equals GDP. The very first one in there is C, and 70% of our economy is the C. So are we consumers? Yeah, we are massive consumers. So we would have to totally retool not only our economy, but our whole way of thinking and our whole way of life. We would not be debt oriented. We would have to be work hard and save. Complete mental paradigm shift for most Americans. I don't think they could handle it. Okay? And most of those debts would be unpayable. They would just go bankrupt. I'm talking like states. The state of Illinois right now is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Okay? So that's what we're looking at in a deflationary event. Something that normally would be a good thing is now a terrifying thing to most central planners, government officials, and the like. All right? Why does this happen? Okay, remember, money is created in a large part in our economy through fractional reserve banking. So you might even have to go back and watch that first video of Fed tools, but if you remember reserve requirements, I put $100 in the bank loans out 90 and keeps 10 in reserve, and when they loan out the 90, those people put 90 back into the bank, and it looks like we have $190. My 100 generated an extra $90 in economic activity, which they then keep 10, they keep a percentage of it, and they loan out $81, and that comes into and pretty soon my $100 deposit has created the effect of $1,000 of economic activity. All right? Because how did the bank create all that money? They loaned it out. So you need to understand that most of the money in our country is created through debt. This is where most Americans they can't bring themselves to understand this. But it is. That's how it's created. It is on the Federal Reserve website. You can go see it. Okay? So what we've got is this pyramid of money that doesn't actually exist. It exists as debt. Now, what happens if people get in trouble and have to pay off their debts? What happens to that pyramid? It starts to shrink, because the less debt we have, actually, if money is created from debt, the less debt, then we also have the less money. I know that throws everyone into like crazy thinking, like my head is spinning. But if people start paying off their debts, we would actually have no money. The other thing that could happen is if people go bankrupt and just don't pay their debts, we also have no money. Because on the books, everyone owes this money, and it's gone when they declare bankruptcy, and then someone's got to make up the difference somewhere. And again, that just takes money out of the system. So if we go down here to our supply and demand graph, we will see, remember, the interest rate is the price of money. And down here we have the quantity, which is the quantity of money down here. And so what happens is our economy might be functioning at this level, but if we have a deflationary event, all that money goes to money heaven. It disappears. It is gone if people pay it off, or if people declare bankruptcy, that money disappears, and our supply curve moves up and to the right, up and to the left. And if that's the case, you'll start to see the interest rate rise. So if ever you start to see the interest rate rise, that means the Federal Reserve has lost control of the situation, and it's about to collapse. We are going to have a major deflationary event. The last really big deflationary event happened in 1929, 1930. It was the great stock market crash, and then all the bank failures, and all through the 1930s was total devastation. Okay? So, we are right on the edge of that today. Why do I say this? Because of diminishing marginal returns. If you remember in this class, going back, chapters 1, 2, and 4, and yeah, we've probably mentioned it in all of them. It is the law of diminishing marginal returns. It is an immutable law. It is also one of the laws of thermodynamics in physics. It is the same. All things tend towards entropy. Okay? I think it's the second law of thermodynamics. So here we are. If we put some energy in, we get some good benefits out of it. This was the debt we incurred in the 1940s. We went into massive debt and we won World War II. That was worth something. Okay, and we said, let's keep going. And we did it into the 50s and into the 60s, and we kind of topped out there, and then it started to get worse into the 70s. In the 80s, we had a bit of a recovery, but that was more due to increasing or decreasing government regulations. And so we came down here, we had the 90s, and now here we are right there. We are here. For every dollar we now borrow at the federal government level, we get 3 cents of a return in economic activity. For every dollar we borrow, it gives us an increase in GDP of 3 cents. That's it. So we had our increasing returns, and now we're getting saturated with debt, diminishing marginal returns. And with that saturation of debt, we are getting less and less out of it. We are on the diminishing marginal return side, and we will soon pass into the negative returns. So that for every dollar we produce, we will actually shrink the GDP. For every dollar that we create out of thin air and put into the economy will actually cost us more in debt payments than it will produce in economic activity. And that's the end game. There's nowhere to go from there but back to reality. And back to reality means something really hard, because we've got all those dislocations in the economy, and when it all snaps back, it's going to be incredibly painful. Okay? So here's what happens. If people don't or can't go into debt, then no money is created. If everyone is saturated with debt, the people are like, no, I don't want to take a loan. How is the bank going to create more money? How is the economy going to create more money if we're on a fractional reserve system based on debt and no one wants any debt? It can't. And so here we go. John Maynard Keynes, the famous economist back in the 1930s, who wrote the book on all this kind of stuff and saw it happen, he said this is called a death spiral, or a debt spiral. He called it a liquidity trap, because you're running out of money. He said the problem with this fractional reserve system is that the money supply actually shrinks, driving up interest rates, which causes no one to do anything because money becomes too expensive to borrow. And so as interest rates rise, people borrow less. But as people borrow less, we have less and less money. And so the interest rates rise. And so people borrow less. And so we have less money. So interest rates rise. And the spiral down begins. A second part of the spiral is there's no buyers for goods. People aren't taking out loans, and so they just don't buy. And so if no one buys, then the firms lay people off. The businesses say, well, we don't need you because no one's buying. We're going to cut your hours. But when people have their hours cut, they don't buy things. So firms lay people off, but people don't have any money to buy things, so they lay more off, so they go out of business, and down and down and down we go. Right? So now you know where we're at and how we got here. What's the solution? To go back to reality. That would be one of the most painful events in American history. You're already seeing people in food lines just like the 1930s. Then they were standing in line. Now they're sitting in cars, but they're sitting in car lines like 5 miles long. If you Google Dallas, Fort Worth, they're serving 120,000 people a week just with free food. So, the bread lines, we got them. Okay? So we are right on the edge of that tipping over point. Now, my prediction, where's all this going to go? All right. No existing government can handle this. Even if they know reality is where they need to return to, no one's going to stand for it. And so what we're going to have is a deflationary event, and things are going to go down. People's home values are going to go down. Then they're going to say, wait a minute, I owe $300,000, but the house is only worth $200,000, and they're going to go to the bank and say, here's the keys. Because I'm not going to pay a mortgage. I'm not going to pay $100,000 to be able to sell my house. I'm not going to do that. It didn't go up in value. If it goes down, then I'm done. They're just going to give it back. And the banks are going to lose a ton of money. Okay? So we've come from cheap housing to expensive housing, and we're going to have a deflation. And we're right in the middle of it now. Okay? And what is the response from any government or central planner is they are going to print money to the moon. In fact, in an interview with 60 Minutes back in August, Neil Kashkari, one of the federal governor board of directors at the Fed there, told 60 Minutes, he said, we can print an infinite amount of money. We can create as much as Congress wants and will let us. We can just print to the moon. Okay. So as soon as we have a deflationary event, which I think we're right about here, it's just tipping over, and then into 2021, we're going to see it just slide. You thought 2020 was exciting. Oh, 2021 is going to be even more fun. And so it's going to be going down, and then what's happening is people are going to say, I'm not going to deal with this. And so the government and the Fed together will both print to the moon. And when that happens, things will feel good for a while, and then we'll pass into a hyperinflation. All right. Now, will we be as bad as Zimbabwe or Venezuela? Probably not. But in here, some strange things are going to happen. You know, you're going to see gold go to $5,000 an ounce. You're going to see Bitcoin go to $200,000 a Bitcoin. You're going to see cheeseburgers going for $20. It's going to be expensive. Okay. And then that's the time usually when the world says, we don't want dollars anymore because you've printed so many of them, we just don't care. And then we lose the dollar standard and the whole world resets into something else. Will that be an online world currency? Will that be Bitcoin? Will that be just pure chaos as everyone does their own thing? I suspect we're going to get a little of all of that. Okay? So you're getting the predictions. At the end of the class, we're talking about some of these things just to let you know where we are. And the joke is that most economists look at crystal balls that are dark, and they look at them backwards. So economists are kind of good at telling you what happened in the past, but they don't actually know what's going to happen in the future. So understand that you got to take it with a grain of salt, and these are merely some predictions I have based upon some of this knowledge. But that's what I'm laying out for you, some things to think about. Okay? So I've already talked to you about how to invest for the future. You remember, number one thing is get an education. It still holds, whether in inflation or deflation. Education always makes your life better. And remember, an education is not just college. Okay? Understanding any kind of trade or any kind of skill is an education. If you have skills that are marketable, people will hire you. Like if you're a nurse, it doesn't matter where you are on this curve, you got a job. Okay? Those are in-demand skills. If you can operate a crane, if you understand heavy machinery and equipment, if you can, do things on a computer science stuff, you're golden. You're going to be fine. So get an education, make yourself valuable, buy some real goods like a house, especially like right in here, because it's going to rock it up. You guys are right over here. We got some really expensive housing these days. Got a few years, build up your cash, wait for it to slide. You got some great deals. So as a generation, you guys are actually looking pretty good for the next few years. Okay? It's the people that bought here are looking pretty good, but the people that are buying right in here, I feel bad for the millennials. They are going to get some tough times. Okay? So they're probably going to move back in with their parents, and you can buy their house. All right? So there's a lot of things to consider there, and you're just going to have to be aware of them. And that's the point of this class, is to make you more aware of what's going on. So hopefully this will generate some questions, and I'll see you in class.